We have sort of a different representation of a maverick sensibility on stage now with Margo Drakos and Ed Sanders. And I wonder if you could just start to get us a little oriented. Both of you tell us a little bit about your maverick stories and a maverick collaboration that kind of brought you two together. Margo, your story is, for music folks, is a compelling one. I wonder if you could talk a bit about why you're sitting in this chair this afternoon.
Well, it wasn't a well thought out objective initially, but I don't know about maverick. I think Ed can represent that better than myself. But I just quickly, I went to the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia and had a fabulous experience, classical music. I play the cello. And I was actually a double major in composition and cello, and so it's really special today to hear that intersection. I had a very traditional background. I went to Marlborough Music Festival and had all the wonderful chamber and orchestral experiences. I held principal cello and associate principal cello positions, and I was a faculty cello and chamber music professor at Manhattan School of Music and Cleveland Institute of Music, and then and I was a cellist in the American String Quartet. And what happened was sort of by accident, again, because I went to conservatory very young, stopped my formal education to pursue cello, obviously. And I loved the problem solving. I loved the playing with my colleagues and trying to interpret the composer's intentions with my own passions and experiences to communicate that, hopefully, in a powerful way to the audience. And I mean, it was just amazing. But what I found was that there was so much disruptive change happening, particularly, I would say, rather spectacularly in the performing arts field, largely by technology at the time. A lot of traditional business models were really kind of exploding. And there was a lot of doom and gloom in some of my work environments as a cellist in a professional space. And I found it really depressing. And I actually thought that while there were a lot of traditional models and disruption happening, I also thought there was a tremendous opportunity for kind of experimenting with that redefinition and redistribution of what community meant, what the role of an artist in the 21st century is, and kind of going back to the roots of interpreting your past and the past of our rich sort of cultural heritage and bringing that into the future today. So I resigned from my positions as a cellist and ended up founding a tech company, a very logical step. And
all the time.
And I've gone on to do a bit of that now in the last few years, so that's what happened.
Yeah. And just a little bit about what you were trying to do and how you were trying to respond to the technological changes and what you thought technology could do for the orchestra that was having somewhat of a, maybe not a crisis, but was having some,
Well,
identity issues.
Yes. Well, I think it is a crisis, actually. So not to, but I felt very passionate about making sure, which brought Ed and I together as well, was finding ways to not only humanize the orchestra experience, but also look at ways of engaging with the audience rather than just you come in, listen, and go home. Very much like what we're doing today. And I wanted to find ways of leveraging the tools and media of our time to communicate music with the fans, to be able to bring performing arts organizations and artists into people's lives through their mobile phones, through the web, and to make them be able to make the audience feel personally connected and also empowered as audience goers and concert goers and fans to be able to share that with their own community so that they became an active participant in the experience instead of just a one-way push.
Which brought Ed, you into the story in an improbable way, perhaps, an ex-cellist, and how did you two hook up, and what was the sort of tangency point for you?
Well, I think I had a similarly logical progression in my career. I started out as a lawyer, was trained as a lawyer, and had every creative bone in my body crushed by that, and quickly sort of moved on to perhaps more exciting and creative aspirational things. I ended up starting to work in the tech space, and I was based in London running marketing for YouTube, and I've been working at Google now for 4.5, going on 5 years, and currently based in New York. But around the time, I've always been very passionate about the arts and the impact that technology can have on access to these incredible things to people who otherwise wouldn't get access to them. And I think that we've heard a lot of interesting comments today. I still think the world of the orchestra and the world of classical music is incredibly walled off to a lot of people around the world. I remember I got to know Michael through the YouTube Symphony Orchestra, which is how I met Margo, which we've done twice now. The first time in Carnegie Hall in New York and the second time in my native Sydney last year, which was a great thrill. But I remember one of the first times I met Michael, he said to me that all you need to know to love classical music is that you're alive. And I think that's fundamentally at odds with the accessibility that young people particularly have to classical music. I think, John Adams himself sort of said, that it's all about feelings, and I don't think that's communicated at all to people around the world. I think people feel incredibly intimidated, people feel incredibly paranoid about making mistakes, even when talking about classical music. And I think
that whole bourgeois thing that Mason was talking about.
I think it's incredibly sad.
Forbidding sort of edifice almost.
And I think there's a lot of really interesting analogies in the world. I think that I think the wine industry is something you could look at. That a lot of the snobbishness and sort of look down your nose and poo-pooing around wine has gone away, and people have it's become much more mainstream and, dare I say, populist, but it hasn't been dumbed down. And certainly what we were trying to do, sort of coming from a Google, YouTube technology standpoint, was this is not our expertise. People like Michael and Clive Gillinson at Carnegie Hall and the London Symphony Orchestra, they're the ones who know what they're doing. But what we can do is bring a stage to people right around the world and let people in a way that makes them feel welcome. And I think that's one of the big challenges facing the orchestras around the world today. Given
the fact that the orchestra does have that reputation for a lot of the people that we're talking about, a huge part of the audience, the people who come in the door here voluntarily are bought in already, but there's a lot of people who weren't. Why did YouTube and Google, by extension, want to tackle that particular? Was it because it was so challenging? Was it because it was daunting? Why a symphony orchestra for YouTube?
Yeah, it's just the hardest challenge there is. I think we, as a business, we've always been, we thrive on innovation. We thrive challenging the status quo, and we're restless if we don't. I often talk about it being positively disruptive. We try and do things that, why should something sit the way it's always been? Why do people have to sit there and say, well, it's been like that for 150 years, so it should still be that way? It's like, maybe there's a different way we could do it, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but it's no skin off anyone's nose. And, with the YouTube Symphony Orchestra was never set out to be, a rival to the San Francisco Symphony or the New York Philharmonic. That wasn't what it was about. What it was about was giving young people around the world a chance at something they would never have had a chance to participate in, to broadcast that to people who'd never get a chance to see it, and hopefully ignite some sort of spark that way, and that's all.
Many people may or may not have heard the concerts themselves, streamed the concerts themselves, or been there in attendance, but it did more than that, and I wonder if you would both talk about the way in which you tried to sort of crack open that edifice and open the experience of classical music up, not just to an audience online, but in a sort of a different way because of technology. What do you think the real takeaways and the achievements were?
I think one thing that we've often talked about is, and Margo mentioned it earlier, but humanising the orchestra, I think is something that is not done around the world nearly enough.
Just to interject, I always say that...
I actually ran a book on how long it'd be before Margo introduced. 6 minutes, so I've won my bet.
You should ask. Well, I won't. I'll save my retaliation for later. But I was mentioning yesterday that I think it's kind of a fascinating thing if you ask people in San Francisco to name a member of the football or baseball team. They can usually most individuals would be able to with great ease. Identify a player in the team, and I think it's very rare, even sometimes from regular season subscribers and things of concert goers, that they know one player, or perhaps they know the concertmaster's name, or maybe the principal oboist or something. But it's very rare that they really know the people.
We should offer a raffle prize to anybody who can name 10 members of the orchestra, huh? Even devoted symphony goers.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
No,
yeah, I
but
think and you did a beautiful job with the pieces that YouTube, some of the amazing material that that Ed's team put together for introducing the winners of the YouTube Symphony Orchestra project to the community, but even above and beyond. They were required to participate and share their own stories, or at least apply. They had to understand how to use technology to communicate in some fashion, to participate, to compete for the chance to win.
Yeah, I mean, I think just I spend a lot of my time storytelling, I guess, in my work, trying to package something up that's incredibly complex, incredibly inaccessible, incredibly difficult, and putting it in a way that normal people can understand it and therefore are attracted to it, or, I mean, it's kind of marketing 101, right? But I think that an example of the sort of humanizing of the orchestra was we had a kid playing who was 15 years old. His family had moved from the Ukraine after the Chernobyl disaster in the mid-'80s. He'd moved to Argentina, started playing the violin in a remote village, quickly outgrew the teachers that who were teaching him, and turned to the internet to see the great concert masters and soloists on YouTube and started to copy them. And that is an incredible story to know about somebody performing in an orchestra. It's never going to replace proper teaching, one-on-one, but that's not what it's about. And people who miss that point are the same people who are putting up the walls which are blocking off the beauty and simplicity of classical music to people right around the world.
Yeah. Let me ask you both this question. In order for, I mean, I don't know what the numbers were exactly, but the number of people who watched the YouTube concerts and followed it on their phones and...
33 million people watched online, right, and 2.8 million through mobile for an average of like 25 minutes.
You could do my job.
Oh,
What?
Which is good.
I'm assuming that it exceeded even your most wild and optimistic projections. Is that a fair statement?
Well, at the time, it was the highest recorded streamed event that YouTube had done. I worked with U2, and we streamed a concert of U2's 360 tour from the Rose Bowl, and we had 10 million views. It was earlier on in the technology stage, but in how we could develop the technology and what we could do with it. But that was, at that stage, the YouTube Symphony was, the highest by a factor of 3, and it exceeded expectations. But I think it was interesting that it did confirm what we knew, that there is an extraordinarily large classical music community in the world that's utterly fragmented. Mm-hmm. It's all over the place, and there are passionate fans of all sorts of different niche things and mainstream things, but it's completely blown wide. And what the YouTube Symphony did in an interesting way was saying, well, if you can make it accessible and unify it in a specific way around one destination that people will come to, maybe there's a future or a lesson in that.
Well, let's spin it forward a little bit and talk about that. In order for the YouTube Symphony experience, great success that it was, not to be a one-off or a two-off in the case of the two concerts, what are the lessons going forward for, this orchestra or any orchestra that's operating in a more conventional kind of, ticket at the door and coming in for the live experience, however it's being expanded? Margo, what are some of the things that you can take away from the YouTube experience that really are broader and more resonant sort of lessons for the orchestra business in general?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, using the work that Ed's team did and my company InstantEncore powered some of the mobile work closely with Ed's group to look at some of the mobile and web components to have hopefully the YouTube Symphony experience go viral. And what's been happening as a result of it in the last year has been incredible, because symphonies like Detroit Symphony and Sydney Symphony and Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center have been able to take the model that was created as a result of the YouTube Symphony Orchestra project and translate it into their own local environment. So, for example, Detroit Symphony has a mobile app sponsored by a local entity that gets credit as the mobile app opens. They've integrated targeted marketing throughout all of their things, and this was an orchestra that was in deep problems, and they've taken technology, and one of their goals is to be one of the most accessible orchestras and turn that inside out, and they are doing live webcast streaming on mobile and web regularly. They had one of the largest views for any event in the U.S. It was over 10,000 recently for classical music, for an orchestra concert from Detroit Symphony to have over 10,000 people watching on the web and mobile, I think is so exciting. And it was sponsored. It was new revenue streams integrated with the corporate sponsorship. I think that's a fantastic model. Same for Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center. They have taken their very, very small, always sold out concerts. They oftentimes also have a number of snowbirds who are not able to get to some of the concerts, or some elderly people late in the evenings who might not feel comfortable getting into the Manhattan at late. So they're now streaming on the web and mobile and have an integrated approach to that. And it's incredible to see the interaction, the tweets that go back and forth. And again, and that was something with the YouTube project that was incredible too. I mean, it was one of the major #1 trending topic on Twitter. You were seeing people tweet outside the YouTube Symphony Orchestra to each other, being engaged across every social network platform, and so I think it's been really exciting for some of these orchestras that you thought it would never happen, that the unions would allow it, the stagehands, that this could never happen. And in the case just finally, in Sydney's case with Sydney Symphony, it's now sponsored by Big Pond, by and Telstra, their telco and entertainment media company that was a big partner for the YouTube project. And they came away from that and said, you know what, we're going to sponsor 15 live video streaming events for Sydney Symphony and the Sydney Opera House coming post that event, and sponsored and are paying above and beyond their sponsorship for that with the orchestra. So I think that's an extremely exciting, whether you're doing it small or large.
Yeah, I mean, I think from our point of view, those sorts of stories are just totally, it's just success in a bottle, basically. For us, is to show people how to do something and have them take it and run with it. We're not interested in trying to control it or bring it back into our domain. It's more, here's the technology, here's the platform, take the toolkit and do it for yourselves. But I think that the biggest lesson that these orchestras have taken, that I've talked about for a long time, is YouTube and technology in general are amazing sort of sandboxes and experimental playgrounds. And I think that we're at a point now where businesses, institutions, schools, etc., can take risks with technology that they've never been in a position to be in before. And because the cost of experimentation is just negligible. And if things in times gone by, to take a big bet on something, or to try a new marketing campaign or a new idea or a new attempt at a revenue stream, if it didn't work, it was very costly, resource-wise, time-wise, etc. And now the cost of experimentation is so low. I mean, I often run projects where developers are cheap. You pay them in beer and pizza, and you have
Google coin of the realm, huh?
This fascinating situation where I think technology is one of the first industries where people, in so many other industries, the older you are, the better you are. And technology has challenged that in the sense that some of the people who know so much about how to do this stuff are 23, 24 years old. And on the one hand, that's terrifying, and on the other hand, it's absolutely thrilling, because they take risks, they live and breathe in this world, and they know what is going to stick. And so if you can empower people, and I suppose my point is that in a lot of institutions, companies worldwide, the gap between the people who know what to do technologically and the people making the decisions is extremely broad.
You anticipated my question. That is, I'm a 64-year-old board member or administrator at an orchestra, and I'm saying, wait a minute, we're going to start webcasting and distributing our content, which has been privileged and has been about the live experience and about selling tickets. How do you answer that concern about, are we pillaging or taking away from the live experience by distributing our product? You talked about the unions, buying into this finally in a way that you might not have thought was possible. How does what you're talking about relate to the live experience, the concert experience, which orchestras, after all, have been built on now for 150 years or so? How does the technology not steal away from the live experience?
Well, I think you have to get over the fear of it first. There's such change. We said this in Australia. That concept of that change is lost, and that people sometimes get more, everyone tends to want to just build more walled gardens. As you know, it's when things get scary, you just want to retreat more and more. And then I think, unfortunately, to whether or not any orchestra wants to, or administration or whatever wants to they don't have a choice. It is. So you either, I think what you're seeing is across, this is not exclusive just to orchestras. This is across many, many industries. Sorry.
I think it's in his pocket. It's because it's in his pocket. He's hitting the...
Oh, is it hitting?
Great. You can talk twice as much now.
So I think the challenge for orchestra, I think you can't ignore, not just, again, just to go back, that I think this is not unique to orchestras. You're seeing this across so many industries. It's just that the performing arts was perhaps hit a little bit sooner when you have the transition from records to tapes to CDs to DVDs, and then you had the YouTube, and you have everything out there. So a lot of those traditional models, just where it used to be. I remember when somebody had told me long ago that there was a member of the Chicago Symphony. It was cheaper if they had stayed home to do recording sessions back in the day than be on a tour with the symphony, because they would make so much greater residuals from having actually played on a commercial gig at home. But that model has just, a lot of this has just changed, right? Or it's no longer there. So you have to be, you can't afford to want to just be more and more close. It's not a question, I think you kind of have to step back and think about, okay, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve? Who are we trying to reach? The audience question earlier, that maybe a composer doesn't have to think about who they're writing each note for necessarily, but you have to think about what is the relevance of your music making in the people's lives in your community? And that community can be in your local backyard, or it can be a super dispersed population, like we saw with the YouTube, where you had people from Azerbaijan to Palestine, to wherever, phoning things in. So I think that you have to take a moment to remind ourselves of the importance, because at the end of the day, you don't practice in your room your whole life to just play for yourself and, for other people who share the same, great detail about your appoggiatura or this oscillation speed of your vibrato. And ideally, you work on those tools as a mechanism to be able to communicate with your community and be relevant. And I think technology is the most fundamental part or one of the most fundamental parts that needs to be incorporated in that story.
I think just to add to that, I think one of the projects that you may or may not be familiar with that we also did was the Google Art project, where we worked with, which is an ongoing initiative where we have, you've all sort of seen Street View, where you can zoom in and see your house. We took that and decided to blow it open and go into some of the most famous museums of the world, and in super, super high resolution capture amazing artworks from those institutions and make them accessible for free to everybody in the world. And the discussion around, there were a lot of discussions with institutions around, well, why is anybody going to come if they can just sit at home and see it from the comfort of their own living room or desk or whatever? And it's been completely the opposite. There's, to Margo's point about everybody thought TV was going to kill radio, everyone thought video was going to kill TV, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. Media consumption and consumption of great content is just going up. Yeah. And so I think that what the institutions who were involved with us in the art project, for example, found that foot traffic and visitors to the museums after people got a taste of it online increased. And so I think that the real key is the fear of experimentation and the fear of letting go.
Yeah. And every just to second that, every example from the Chicago Cubs when they started broadcasting their concerts their games on WGN. I'm from Chicago. WGN Channel 9. When they were in last place, nobody had ever. They ended up they have the largest number of ticket sales of any baseball team without having one. Significant. Yeah, thank you. So, and I think you see that with the Met with the ticket sales. You see that anytime, in any instance where you're making content available, it drives, because nothing replaces the live experience. But if you can do it in a human way, it's extraordinarily positive.
Michael was talking earlier about sort of the fusion of art forms, and he's done a lot of it in Miami with the New World and done some of it here with projections. experience and different kinds of ways of opening up the concert. I wonder where you see that the application of technology in that area about sort of changing and transforming the experience of music and how we're going to receive it, as how we're going to change as audiences and how orchestras are going to change as producing organizations because of technology.
Well, just quickly, and then I mean, you've done so many amazing things to really experiment and push those boundaries. But I think I am sort of a traditionalist by nature of how I like to enjoy my Beethoven or whatever. But I think one of the things that's important that I remind myself as I've left making my living as a classical musician is to ideally give options. It's not that one way has to permeate everything, but you want to encourage people to be able to, again, they have to use the media models of their time and the way that they're communicating today, which is, most, I think teenagers in the US send an average of 100 text messages a day. They think calling is rude. That is a reality of the future generations if you wish to have those attendees of the San Francisco Symphony. Now, it doesn't mean you have to allow open free texting and Skype calling during the performance, but you have to, these are parts of that, I think, equation that are real. And just to Ed's point on storytelling, I mentioned this in the blog ahead of the Mavericks, and it got me thinking about this again. A friend of mine was killed in Libya, one of the first journalists, photojournalists, amazing gentleman, Chris Hondros. And he to say he was a classical music lover is the understatement of the century. And Mahler and Beethoven, Schumann, Bach, everything was just an enormous part of his being. And when he was killed, actually a number of musicians who were part of the YouTube project, Colin Jacobson, and we arranged to have music performed at his funeral. And just like this event is being streamed today on Ustream, his funeral was streamed live from Brooklyn on Ustream, and there were it included many pieces, Schubert, Mahler, a whole host of things. And what was amazing to me was that over 1,000 people from all over the world, from Afghanistan to Libya to Europe to whatever, tuned in to watch and listen to this unbelievable music. It was Death and the Maiden, it was Cavatina, it was incredible. And Sarah Willis, a horn player that Ed and I know very well, a wonderful player from the Berlin Philharmonic, she and I were chatting online during it. She knew Chris very well as well. And it was this amazing moment of hearing these incredible pieces of the past, and you were being comforted during this just horrific thing, and yet you were being able to communicate with one another. And I remember Sarah saying A World Away, and Sarah was saying, I find it so irritating that people are, chatting, or we were talking about like during, Death and the Maiden, you just wanted it kind of quiet. And I was like, just push the little button in the, in the corner and remove the chat from it so you can just listen. And so that's my whole long-winded story about the fact that ideally she could experience that quietly, but for others, they wanted to have that chat dialogue while this was going on, and it was comforting to them, and it was through technology. I thought it was a beautiful kind of metaphor of that.
A tool, not a tyranny.
Beautifully said.
Exactly, yeah. Ed, you were going to pick up on something.
No, I just think that I agree with the point about options. I mean, I think it feels, to me, it feels very boxed at the moment, and I think that for me, sort of sitting down there, listening to John talking and having him tell the story about in his piece tonight, to listen out for the timpani there's a chromatic scale because the guys can be pushing the pedal up. I know that now, and that's added to my experience. Yeah. But I've been privileged enough to have the background and hear John talk and so on. So, to me, I think the music in its purest form doesn't need to be complicated or, necessarily we have to have video with music or sensory overload in order to appease people at all. I think, the purity and simplicity of what has always made it great will still make it great. But I think having that, we've seen in so many other forms of content, the story that's wrapped around the content itself is so interesting. And when you see fan communities spring up, when you see, parodies, when you see of films, for example. You used to go to the cinema and see a film, and that was it. You didn't know anything about the actors, you didn't know anything about the director, and then came the VCR with the behind-the-scenes documentary, and then the deleted scenes, and then the gag reel, and then the community that built around it, and then the impersonators, and so if you want to live and breathe a piece of content in the film sense, there's an incredible world you can dive into. And Mason and John and Michael were talking about this world of where they reside, and I think technology has to help people to that rather than the consistent message that if you're not part of it, then you're out.
Yeah.
John said in an essay himself, I don't know exactly when it was published, but it could be published now or 5 years ago or 5 years from now. The only thing we know about the future is that it is bound to surprise us. 10 years from now, there is guaranteed to be a new way of experiencing music. I wonder, in the minute or so we have remaining, if either of you care to project where we might be 10 years from now with...
And just before we say that,
Margo will still be interrupting.
No. Well, I hope so. That would be a nice treat. I love the Bill Gates quote that he said some time ago about we overestimate the change in 1 year and we underestimate the change in 10. Which I think, if you look at 10 years ago, just for a moment to put in context, so Ed can say a deep thought here at the end, and speak for me, I'm hoping. When you think about, it was 10 years ago that the first iPod launched. How many people have iPods today? Google, YouTube, what, it was 2004, I think, the first with the San Diego Zoo one clip.
2005.
Sorry. And you look at all the things in the last years that you can't believe that have taken, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Google, blah, 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 blah. So, anyways, I don't know. As regards to music, I think you're going to have, personally on the Dire side, speaking to the organization side, I think the institutions are being so greatly challenged across the institutional structure of orchestral environments as a whole, or the performing arts is being challenge. And I think that if you're not accessible and you haven't figured out how to be relevant to whatever your community is without denigrating your art, but being true to your artistic integrity, but being a part of your community, whether that's virtually or in real environment, I think you will be no longer in existence.
Darwinian, yeah.
For me, I think it's really, I don't even know what I'm doing next week, let alone what I'm doing in 10 years. But I think it's tremendously exciting. I think if the access to technological evolution right around the world and the ideas that are coming from everywhere, and they've never been able to come from everywhere before. You had to go to the right schools, you had to go to have the right money behind you, you had to have the right education, you had to do all that sort of thing. And now I think that a lot of those walls are coming down in a really healthy, positive way. And I think that the institutions and companies which embrace that and can tell their own story and can be shown to be experimenting and pushing innovation forward rather than standing still are the ones who are going to survive. But it's really exciting times. I think you can either be terrified by it or you can let go a little bit and see what happens.
Fabulous. We keep having to cut off these conversations just when they're getting going, but we'll all be back in about 15 minutes, and all of the participants, with one exception, Michael won't be back, but everyone else will be, and we'll talk to each other and to you. So we'll see you in about 15 minutes.
Thank you.
Thanks.